I need a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Alright, so it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of adopting the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed, same sign? Okay, chair votes aye as well. The agenda is adopted. Okay.
And then we need to approve the minutes.
Okay. Okay. I'm guessing everybody's probably had a moment to look over those, but it'll take a minute. Need a motion to approve the minutes from the October meeting?
So moved.
All right, it's been moved, it's been seconded. All in favor of approving the minutes from the last meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Chair votes aye as well. The minutes from October have been approved. Okay, now it's time for public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to comment on any public matter that is not on the agenda of the meeting and is within the jurisdiction of the Teachers Retirement Board.
Yeah.
Okay. However, the board may not take action on any issues raised unless it is included on the agenda. Public comment has been allowed. If issues are raised that would require board action, the issue would need to be included on the agenda for a future meeting. Public matter does not include disability applications or contested cases and other adjudicative proceedings. It does.
Yeah.
This is real fun. Denise is like, oh God, you butchered it. I'm like, no, it's all words.
So no public comment?
No public comment?
Move on then.
Okay. The next item is the cybersecurity insurance and coverage. Brett Dahl from the Department of Administration, Risk Management, and Tort Defense Division.
Thank you. Well, good morning, board members.
Morning.
Bright, beautiful, snowy, wintry morning. I actually, it's kind of nice to take a break from claims arising from snowplows. Our drivers, our state drivers are pretty good drivers. But you know, things kind of change. We all kind of get used to driving in this new snow, don't we, on this side. So
Yeah, definitely.
it's nice to kind of be away from that and be here to talk with the board and with the TRS staff about some important issues involving cyber insurance. So thank you for your time and for the opportunity, Sean, I appreciate that. I guess what I plan to do today is kind of hit this at a high level. You'll see that the slides are packed with a bunch of information. So I'll try to hit the high points, and then what's remaining that I don't cover is there for you to be aware of. We have a very good cyber program in place for the board, for all of our agencies and universities, and so just kind of want to educate you, inform you how it all works. And maybe put your minds at ease if you're out there, like we all are, worried about this new world of cyber, the exposure, private and personal health information. Next slide, please. So with that, no risk management presentation would be complete without a bit of a disclaimer. So I'll be back to that slide. What I just said is, it's, some of the material may be more representative of our opinions than what might be construed in the state's insurance policy. I try to be really careful with that, but sometimes I tend to veer and get off track, so we'll try to stick with the task at hand today. Next slide, please. So the agenda today, what I wanted to cover with the board and the staff, and then leave time at the end for questions, we want to talk about personal and private information, what that means, why it's important, some of the trends that we're seeing with information security and data, the threats that are out there that are very real, that we see every day, and the organizations in government, higher education who are particularly vulnerable because of all the information that we store, how those can affect us. I want to give you some examples. Some of those are made in Montana, unfortunately. Breaches and cyber incidents, talk about cyber insurance, instant response if there's ever something that comes up, or that you take the bait and you get one of those phishing messages and someone clicks on it, and it takes you to a place where you don't want to be. What do you do from there? We'll talk about that and conclude with a brief discussion about risk management and prevention and being careful about not falling into some of those traps, and then leave some time for questions at the end. Next slide, please. I should just confirm, Sean, I think I have an hour for the
Yeah,
presentation.
you have until 10 o'clock.
Okay. I would never want to wear on my welcome or overstep my bounds in terms of my time, because you have many, many more important issues today, so thank you. I thought I'd clarify that at the beginning. So personal and private information, security breaches may result in identity and theft and require disclosure and mitigation. We use the term breach carefully, because when you think of the term breach, what does it connote? It connotes guilt, that somebody did something wrong. We typically refer to these as incidents until they've been vetted through council and the laws in the various states and the federal laws are looked at to see whether there's actually a quote-unquote breach versus just an incident. And so I might kind of use those terms interchangeably, but they're technically, from our view, incidents until until our council's involved, until we determine that there was actually an unauthorized disclosure. Personal and private information is protected by laws in 47 states, the District of Columbia, U.S. territories, and federal law. What makes it exciting and sometimes confusing is that the laws all differ in the various states. So in a situation where we once had an incident with one of our university campuses where some computers were stolen and had private information on them, students in 20 states had to be notified. So it's never usually just one. Oftentimes, there are people in different states with different laws that could be affected by these incidents. The laws vary between jurisdictions, bullet 3, and finally on this slide, there's limited precedent. So, for example, what does the term access mean? In one of our cyber incidents that I'll talk about a little bit later, it was clear that hackers from China got into one of the state systems, but it wasn't clear where the tracks of the beast led. You know, you could gather that they were they got into the systems, but where did the tracks lead? Couldn't determine that. So out of an abundance of caution, we typically try to notify people so that their data, their information, and their lives are protected. So what does access mean is often, kind of a term that our attorneys have to deal with. And then what is a reasonable notice time? Federal law prescribes that on HIPAA information. In many cases, I think with medical information, there's a 60-day notification requirement. So imagine that if hackers get in and take private health information, and we're talking about 2 million people, there's 60 days to notify. And so, I mean, it's not like Sean can hire a bunch of temporary people and bring them in and put them to work and say, write 2 million letters and let people know, oops, something bad happened. We use insurance, we use vendors and law firms and systems that are time proven and that can get that information out very, very quickly in accordance with federal and state law. So, next slide, please.
Just out of curiosity, which states would not have laws on something like this?
That's correct. We mentioned 47. I'm actually not sure which 3 don't yet have laws. You would think they would fall in line with the other 47. But I'm not sure. Information security incidents, some trends and things to be aware of. And am I talking loud enough for everybody that's online? Can you hear me? Okay, I just wanted to make sure that, that I'm coming through. So just to kind of break this down by the types of incidents and causes, folks, 31% of incidents, not surprisingly, involve phishing and hacking malware. Now that's the situation where you've seen those emails, haven't you? I get text messages all the time and they say, check this out, do this. It gets deleted. If it's not somebody I know or something that I would be likely to be familiar with, I don't open it because it could put malware on your phone. Then a lot of that malware can have tracking mechanisms and tracking bots in there that can actually track financial transactions. You can get into your financial system and find out what your bank account numbers are. So the pirates, the people that promote these frauds and schemes are very, very smart. And many of them have nothing more than time on their side to figure out how to do all this. So phishing's big, 31%. Other causes involve employee action or mistake. I'm reminded of one that involved an employee for the state of New York that was in a subway and riding a train, and on his laptop he had the information, private information about people with certain diseases. And he left his laptop to go to the restroom, came back and the laptop's missing. Could be a problem, couldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. He reported that, and because of the nature of the type of information on that computer, it resulted in, I think, 200,000 or 300,000 needing to be notified, and there was a federal regulatory fine levied against that municipality as a result of that. So we make mistakes. We've got to be careful with private information. Keep it off your laptop. Be careful about taking it home in folders, because you could lose it, or someone could get hold of it or steal it, and you never know when it's going to end up. External theft. That kind of falls into the arena of what I mentioned before about laptops being taken and stolen. We've had many of those thefts that are comprised kind of our cyber incident portfolio. 14% from a vendor. We do contract with people. They take our information, they use it, they access it, they provide service, and sometimes they mess things up. Internal theft from one of our own employees, embezzlement, fraud, or doesn't happen often, but when it does, it could involve personal information. And finally, the lost or improper disposal. I became aware some time ago of, in some of those old printers and copiers, that they make all those copies and the drums engrave the images. So I was once told by a colleague in another state that some of those drums that are discarded, that people can get and find images on some of the drums and on some of the mechanisms that are used in printing machines. Now, that's since been changed. I think that the companies that manufacture that have got wise, but that's a bit of a concern, thinking all the stuff you've ever copied that roll across the drum and that you ended up passing and handing out at some point. We don't, hopefully it ended up in the dump and it got shredded or discarded appropriately, but we don't know. But that's kind of where the causes are coming and where it's all happening. Next slide, please. So we thought it would be interesting to point out to the board where some of the trends are. The average weekly attacks per organization, this is in 21. We don't yet have 22 information. We're not, through the year quite yet, but this is according to Forbes magazine. So if you look at the top organizations most affected, where does government fall?
Right after education.
Right up near the top of, right up near the top. Government, military, education, our universities, our program covers universities and state agencies and state universities. So, and why, again, are they so susceptible to these thefts? Well, if you think about the Department of Public Health and all the people they serve, they have probably information in their files, private information on many of Montana's citizens. What about our driver's licenses? You think about all the, everybody has to have a license to drive except for underage kids who shouldn't be driving but maybe do. But yes, it's a system, and it could be hacked or somehow obtained. So I won't go through all those, but just to let you know again that we're kind of near the top in terms of exposure. And that presents a bit more of a challenge getting the insurance, because the insurance carriers and the underwriters that we work with are onto this. They see where these incidents are coming from. A lot of them involve government and higher education. Next slide.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
This is Steve Brown. Excuse me, I'm working remotely. I'm wondering, in today's computer world, why we don't have something that we can either put in or on these computers that are taken either by employees or someone else. Isn't there something that can, isn't there a spyware that can be downloaded onto these things so that they aren't lost forever?
Dee, I think that's an excellent question. From the state side, I can tell you that Andy Hanks is the state's chief security officer. And I know that they spend a lot of time with encryption and with software programs and antivirus and anti-software mechanisms to defend and thwart these attempts to get in and get personal and private information. And frankly, one of the reasons that Montana is able to keep our cyber insurance, many states can't buy it anymore because of ransomware claims. Ransomware is eating the industry alive. One of the reasons why we're able to keep our insurance, our program intact, is because the underwriters and the people look at Montana as having fewer losses and claims and having better mechanisms in place. So I guess to answer your question, I don't know a lot about the security software aspects of what they put out there and what all of those are, but I know they do a lot. Could they do more? That's for them to answer, but I do know that we don't see the kind of claims and losses that we've seen in other states. We've had, I think, 55 incidents in 10 years. That may seem like a lot, but that's not too many. And we had a couple big ones early on, and I think education, D, and board members, there's a requirement that everybody take cyber training every year. At least in the executive, the governor has asked, and maybe you've taken that training. 75% of employees take that online cyber training. We give them a discount on their insurance if they do. And I think you've kind of been in the front and center here, Sean, making sure your people attend and that people are participating. And that's created some awareness. But Dee, in answer to your questions, yeah, they're doing a lot of that. I don't know exactly what they're putting out there, but I think we've done pretty well compared to other states.
Have I heard in the past that the majority of these thefts really are on university campuses and not in the general government realm?
That's another excellent question. I would have to tell you that in our experience, most of the claims have come from the government side. We have not had that many come from the university side. The few that we have, and I'll talk about some examples and share them with you later, I call them made in Montana examples, so that we can kind of all learn from actual claims. We've had a few bigger ones in the university system, but in terms of number, probably more on the state side, fortunately.
Thank you.
Director Graham, this is Dan Chamberlain. May I make a comment?
Sure.
Okay. Somebody earlier asked which 3 states don't have cybersecurity legislation. I looked it up on the National Conference of State Legislatures, and according to their site, there's actually 4.
Okay.
Alabama, Arizona, Idaho, and Nevada. However, Arizona and Nevada both have pending legislation, although it doesn't go into detail about the nature of the legislation enacted in the other 46 states.
Thank you, Mr. Chamberlain. We'll update the slide. That's good to know. There were 3, but there's actually
somewhat
4.
outdated too. It's possible that in one of those 2 states that are showing here as pending, that legislation has passed.
Fantastic. Necessary and important. Thank you for sharing that information. I won't go through, this slide's actually a very busy slide. I'll leave this for your information. I think what it points out, the number that you see, there's a big circle around the 17.2 billion of the number of records lost over the past 11 years through breaches, cyber incidents. It lists some of those. I think LinkedIn holds the record for the most. There was a $700 million claims or records were breached on LinkedIn back in 21, and that's the biggest cyber breach in U.S. history. So that stands out as being the big one. And then some of those are listed, in different orders there, just as a point of reference. Next slide. Next, please. I think you clicked on, I think, hopefully. Previous slide, please. So, yeah, I think that there was some content in here, but government and higher education are targets. You mentioned that. I just want to make sure there's nothing important that, when you click, maybe I didn't get the transitions in there, but what I wanted to tell you about this particular slide, these 3 things. First of all, they're targets because they have large amounts of sensitive data that are stored on citizens, students, and employees. 1. 2, there's an increasing reliance on portable computing devices. I mean, many of us work remotely now, don't we? And so our computers are at home or in different places, and we try to be careful with our computers. Hopefully don't have too much personal or private information on them, but stuff can happen. So we rely on portable devices. We're talking about phones as well, aren't we? Phones or iPads. So there's ways of breaking in and accessing data. And as I mentioned, hackers and cyber criminals are pretty smart these days, and they have found ways to break in and intrude. And then finally, there's a misplaced belief, 3rd point I would make on this slide, that cyber criminals are interested only in financial institutions, that they only want your money. What do you think about that? I mean, that would seem obvious if they want to get in and get money. And I know that when my father-in-law passed away and left his estate, he had a lot of money in an account. And on a personal note, my wife was out doing online banking and trying to transfer that. Someone got in and sent a phishing message to her. Had she accepted that, they might have got in and got some of his money from his estate. So that really hit home to me on a personal note about what can happen with online banking and how, yeah, I can see why most of us would be concerned about the financial aspects, but also keep in mind that these cyber criminals can take that private and personal health information and sell it on the black market. And I mean, those records can be, they can sell those for I think $2 or $3 or $4 a record. If you have 1 million of them, you know, maybe there's a volume discount that gives somebody for the 1 million or 2 million they have, but they can take that data and find ways to get at other personal items that you may have. Next please. So what are the threats? I've mentioned these in a high note. Inside threats, we talked about, but those involve employee negligence primarily. Lost portable devices, unintended disclosures by email or fax. Sometimes, you know, you get, I mean, how often do we pass an email on to a coworker? You know, and it might have some personal information and we're not thinking, oh, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't pass this on. And then you do, and then a bunch of people in the organization pass it on, and then suddenly someone's hurt or claiming that they're damaged because now everybody knows something about their personal life. Secondly, failure to encrypt portable devices. Encryption's become a lot more common. I can't say what percentage of our laptops are encrypted at the state level or the university level. I know they have software. I know the people that take them home a lot. There's more stringent requirements, but I don't exactly know how many people have encryption devices on their software or their laptops. Never a bad idea. If that's something that you all look at some point in time, we wouldn't be unhappy with that. That would be a good risk management strategy. Number 3, your employees. Improper disposal of information. I mean, believe it or not, some people just take their records when they're doing their spring cleaning and stick them in the dumpster. People actually do go through those dumpsters, often after hours, and can look through there and find personal information. And some employees just they're not aware. Education and awareness may be lacking. They don't understand this stuff because they're not dealing with it every day. So that online training, and I know that when you take it, some of us say, oh, here we go again. You know, that's that 6-hour, 12 module training. I'm not one of those that roll my eyes anymore. I'm kind of into that. I think it's important, but it gets people thinking. And I've been tested 3 times this year. Well, they'll send out an email and they'll try to get you to open it. So, I mean, our IT people try to get us to be thinking about what could happen if we open a phishing message, and then where it could lead us. So, education awareness, also important. Finally, outside threats, and I recognized, I thought I changed the slide, I jumped from 3 to 5, so 4 must not have been very important. So, they're listed hackers, we've talked about social engineering, and that's the approach that cyber criminals take through the social media to obtain personal or private information through Messenger, Facebook, Instagram, and there are other ways that they can get into and break accounts. I've had to change my password on Facebook and kind of redial how I do that 2 or 3 times this year, because people get in and they limit who can see your posts and whose posts you can see, and they can get in and kind of put restrictions on what you do. It's a little bit scary. So I'm not, I don't know why that happens. I don't fully understand it, but I do know that people say, I never get your posts. And they're friends, and they're in my short circle of people that I would let know about things that are going on. And I find other people that I don't know getting in and saying, oh, nice post. Well, who are you?
Yeah.
And there's someone from some other country that I've never met before. So, any questions on this slide? I'm kind of moving through the material quickly as we go along from any members of the board or any staff. I'm hoping I'm catching the important highlights that kind of tell you a little bit more about our world.
Just to comment on the social side, their security requirements change over time. And it seems that the hackers understand that better than the people that should be changing their security. And so it seems like every time there's a new reiteration of Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever else, that all of a sudden there's things open that weren't open before because the security process has changed things.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And then there's Twitter, I won't go to that. But I mean, and I'm not in any way trying to make a political statement there, but I have Twittered a few times, not many, but people that I know that have used that platform a lot. It's a little more confusing. And there's, I mean, it's just, I mean, they're going to transition to Twitter Blue and doing some different things there, which I'm not sure I would now feel as comfortable going out and trying to start tweeting to people, given that I'm not exactly sure how that works and how it's all gonna roll out. So just some things to be aware of with social engineering. Thieves and vendors and businesses, I would tell you, and just ask Sean, do you have vendors that house your data and that work with your data?
We do have vendors that work with our data, yes, absolutely.
It's very common.
Yeah.
And many agencies do. And I think we've worked with Denise, and Denise and others have been very careful to make sure that those vendors that have your data have their own cyber insurance. And that they carry that so that if they release information, they're your vendors, something gets out, that the board and that the teacher's retirement system and your employees are all protected. We have found in a few occasions where some agencies use vendors don't have that in place. Cyber insurance requirements, contractual insurance requirements that impose that responsibility on the vendor that's taking care of their information. So, next slide. So what's at stake? Time, money, and reputation. And don't want to be the dead dog, because you as board members understand, you know, you're appointed, you serve in highly visible and public positions, that, you know, these things happen when they happen, if they happen, and you haven't had one here. To your credit, kudos to you for that, for having good security, good things in place. That there's time spent on the response. I mean, we get the call, hopefully, Denise calls us and said, Brett, we think we had an incident. Over the weekend, someone got into our system, something looks funny. Then there's a notification where we will put the carrier on notice and work with their attorneys and others. And then that kind of kicks in the whole incident response process for how we work with the board. We won't work out of concert. Our privacy counsel for our attorneys won't work out of consort with Denise and with Sean, with the board. We want to be on the same page, but we want to be transparent moving forward so that people understand what the steps are. You know, we've always said this, there's a tendency when something bad happens to go out and tell everybody, oh, we messed up. You know, if something happens, some hackers got in, to go out, and we actually had a director at one point started, as a, maybe not a director, but an employee that started writing letters to the people saying, I'm sorry, you know, that this happened, and that's noble and it's good to, you know, to try to make it right. But when we got in and did the investigation, our attorneys, forensics experts and others found out that there was actually no breach. They broke in, but the tracks of the beast went nowhere. So there wasn't an unauthorized disclosure. There was an entry and an access point, but no unauthorized disclosure and no material risk of harm. Hence, no need to notify. So when you start having people get out ahead of that process, then it creates an expectation. So we'll go through the process of how to respond to an incident later, but just very important that we don't lose our minds, we keep our heads on our shoulders, and that we work together to try to then figure out what we're going to do. So there's time spent away on day-to-day operations to do that. It's time consuming. Money, it can mean legal fees. We typically involve privacy counsel for the attorney. Even on small breaches, we involve a company called, a law firm called Baker Hostetler out of New York. Maybe you've heard of them, Denise, or know of them, but the reason, why wouldn't we call local counsel? Why wouldn't we have Denise or local counsel? The insurance carrier Denise is very good, you know, which it does, and you have other attorneys who know this, who know a lot about the law. But we're talking about specialty law. And this law firm in New York, and they have another one in California and one in Texas, they specialize in information security and data breaches. So they know those 47 state laws and the federal laws. And furthermore, they know the attorney generals in all those states. I believe that in a breach over 500 incidents, I could be wrong, the numbers up there kind of vague, but there's a certain threshold where the attorney generals need to be notified in states if the breach exceeds a certain amount. I think it might be 500 in Montana, I could be wrong, so don't quote me, but I probably should look that before I came, but they need to be notified at some point. Do you know what that is, Denise?
I don't think there's a number on it. I think the statute just is if there is a,
Anything.
if there has been a breach.
Then they're notified.
Yep.
Good, there you have it. So that can be legal fees. costs if we're using that law firm out of New York or any one of the carriers law firms. And forensics investigation expenses, if they're gonna bring Kroll or Mandiant or some other firm in to go in and look at what happened to try to find out where the hackers got in, what the points of entry were, and where they went, then there's forensics expense. Credit monitoring, I mean, you notify people that something bad happened, you have a legal responsibility to tell them that, oh, you know, we're sorry, but your information was accessed, we're doing everything we can to protect your identity. And that usually involves notification, call centers, credit monitoring. Have you received, any of you been a part of that, received a notice in the mail saying someone could have gotten to your account? I know I have twice.
Yeah.
And they'll say, do you want credit monitoring? And what do they typically, what else do they offer usually? Identity theft resolution services, or they'll give you a few choices of things you could do. And in many cases, people are glad to be noticed, but they're not worried. And in most of the time, probably 80% of the time, they choose not to participate in the credit monitoring that's offered. They just appreciate the candor and the transparency that they were told and let know about it. But they will be calling their banks and checking their assets, and if they see anything wrong with their banks, then they'll jump on that bandwagon. But there's money and costs. Lawsuits, regulatory fines, corrective action, and penalties. I'm not sure if you're aware that back in 2016, Montana had one of the largest HIPAA breaches at that point in U.S. history, involved the Department of Public Health, and some hackers that got into their 57 systems. That's the incident that I shared with you where forensics revealed that the tracks of the beast went nowhere. But out of an abundance of caution, the Privacy Council for the carrier and the governor and the legislature agreed to notify. So 1.6 million people were notified in 48 days and offered the credit monitoring, the call centers, and some of those things. We avoided a regulatory fine from the Federal Office of Civil Rights. Why? Because they were very pleased with the response. They were very pleased that we had a mechanism and the insurance in place to do it and do it right. So, and then trust. Whenever something happens, your retirees, will they be as trusting? Well, they'll probably be glad that they were notified. But you know, if someone got in and took information from all of your retirees, that might create trust issues. So what's at stake is a lot, isn't it? It's a lot at stake.
Could I ask a question, please? When you said, this is Steve Brown again, when you said that there were 1.6 million notified on the DPHHS breach, how many people, I mean, I thought there were only a little over 1 million people in the state of Montana.
That's a really good question, Dee. So these were people that currently live here, people that had left the state, that they still had information on or for. And I think it was 1.3 million. I might have got that wrong, but it wasn't just the current population. It was people that had lived here and or that had moved. And by the way, names that often come up are people that were deceased. And so the systems require a very, very broad addressing this and letting everyone know. So they notify a lot of people. If it's deceased, then they try to notify them or their families. So they made exhaustive efforts, and that's the difference. I think it's just...
Yeah, and I think all of us were part of that one because I know we got the notification. Thank you.
Thank you, that was a good question. And I'm glad that you got the notification and that people that worked, in part because of the support from the legislature, the governor, and everybody was on the same page. I think that rolled out pretty well. At least the Federal Office of Civil Rights thought it did, and they didn't fine us.
Yeah.
We avoided a regulatory fine, so. Next.
I would say I was also, my husband and I were part of that, and we were notified in a timely manner. And it was
good.
because we were linked to his mother, who had some information on DPHHS. And so we got the credit monitoring and all of that good stuff.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so it rolled out fine,
Yeah.
and we participated, signed up.
And it worked well. Did you by chance take advantage of the call centers? I'm always curious another one.
Didn't do the call center, just took part of the credit monitoring, which I still pay for to this day. Yeah. So,
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I'm glad
It was
that
free
worked out.
initially, but you had to pay for it after a year.
maybe we can call it to some degree a bit of a success story, because
Yeah.
I know that Montana was looked to in terms of the way that that was handled, and I'm not patting myself on the back. You know, I'm giving the legislature the credit, the governor and all the people, including our vendors and our carriers, for doing it and doing it right. It was truly a team effort, very transparent, and went quickly. I mean, try to notify 1.3 million in 48 days if it's a HIPAA breach, and you're talking about private health information. You don't put, 2,000 people on a typewriter or a word processor or a computer and try and rip out letters. They have automated systems that do all that. That's good to know.
Yeah, and I don't recall and know this for a fact, but I've worked for a state for 30 years. I think I got a notification through email as well, too.
Oh, both ways, good.
I think so.
That's the first that I've heard of that. I knew that
Yeah.
the letters went out. But
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong. But for some reason, I thought I had gotten something that way. But I know I mean, obviously, we took advantage of the credit monitoring and stuff right away.
The more ways that you were noticed, the better. What's interesting about that breach in the call centers is the redemption rate was low. The people that actually took advantage of the call center assistance, 10%. The people that actually took advantage of the credit monitoring, I think maybe 15. So again, but the important point is you're given that opportunity.
Yeah.
And you feel a little safer, more secure when it happens. This next slide, just a few breach examples that you may remember or have heard about in the past. South Carolina Department of Revenue, back in the day, this is probably 8 or 10 years ago, there was a phishing attack. Governor Haley was governor then when this happened, Nikki Haley, when all this happened, but it resulted in the theft of approximately 3.6 million social security numbers and 387,000 credit and debit card accounts. And this was highly publicized. The people that I work with for the state of South Carolina, the risk people, they did not have insurance in place. So the governor's office and others went out and they secured the credit monitoring, and they had to scramble because they didn't have a process in place. But everybody got notified, and then they sent the bill to the risk management division to pay out of their fund. But we're glad we have insurance in place so that nobody has to go out and scramble and find all that. In the end, it worked out and people were notified. But if it happens in Montana at any agency or university, we have a process that's been tried, tested, and proven that we can put into place immediately so that there's no guesswork. The Utah Department of Technology Services experienced a brute force attack. Weak passwords were the result of that attack, the reason for the attack, but it resulted in the theft of 780,000 files on Utah residents and information related to sensitive healthcare services provided to children. So this is one of their public health examples where kids' information was released. And certainly we want to protect all of our citizens, but kids are especially vulnerable. So that happened. I happened to be down in Utah. My family lived down there. And I remember it was Easter Sunday. And I remember going to get the paper and reading that happened the day before. And it left an impression on my mind. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty big breach. And, again, you talk about trust and reputation. In this particular situation, a lot of IT processes were changed. Individuals were came and went as a result of that. They didn't have very good security, and they put in some processes that are now very effective. So I talked about Montana Department of Public Health with 1.3 million individuals. So unless you have other questions on our own example, that's our largest breach ever. And I would still call it an incident. Why? Because the hackers broke in, but there was no evidence that they got anything. But our carriers and privacy council, the legislature, the governor did the right thing by saying, out of an abundance of caution, we're going to let everybody know. And they publicized that. The governor told the legislature, they let their constituents know. And that's why you got a letter, and what other people did too. So you don't want to hide those things and try and protect them out of concern that it's going to hurt somebody or in some way, a political way affect them. We do the right thing, and you do too, and I know that that's what the board would want to do. And we've always done that through the 55 incidents that we've managed. So made in Montana, just a couple of quick examples. There's 4 that I'll share. Unencrypted desktop computers were stolen from a vendor's place. This was a claim that involved a vendor. There were only 7 computers stolen. The 7 computers, I believe, contained 100 records that had private information. The vendor went out of business, actually. And actually the shop was closed. So our agency got access through a key, got in, computers had the private information, and these 100 individuals were then notified. and given access to credit monitoring and whatnot. I would also tell you that in state law and federal law, there's also usually a requirement that there's over 500 names. I think in Montana, it's any, again, I don't think there's a threshold, but the press gets notified. So I mean, the attorney generals get notified, the Federal Office of Civil Rights, the press, and so federal and state people are aware, and it can pretty quickly, you know, escalate if it's not managed, and that's why we would work carefully with the board and with the staff at TRS and with Privacy Council to make sure we're messaging it correctly, that we're on the same page and making sure that people's information gets protected. Second bullet, the social security number of individuals was included in material distributed to 1,200 citizens. So this is an interesting, there's a seminar, an agency holds a seminar, and in their packet of information they give out to everybody that attends, big seminar over 4 or 5 days, they use, you know, Sally Joe Smith as an example. Some name, but it had Sally Joe Smith's actual, and it was actual name, I don't want to mention her real name, her actual social security number. Oh. We get the call, whoops, that was in the packet, and it was distributed to 1,200 people, so how many people got notified? You know, well, Sally Joe Smith did, but the other parties that could have been affected. I think we notified the 1,200 people that got the packets about what happened, so they knew. But again, keep track of what you're handing out, what's in your packets, and look at that carefully too. Third, unencrypted content was displayed on a website. The website contained the names and social security numbers of workers' compensation beneficiaries. So you have an agency, it's actually a university, that's promoting risk management. And they're wanting their departments to know where these workers' compensation claims are happening and how can we do a little bit better job of making our workplaces safer. Unfortunately, the information that went out there was a little too personal, had a few things out there that shouldn't have been there. So it all got resolved, people were notified, and we moved on. And I believe that the third one, I think that there were maybe 1,000, 1,500 people that needed to be notified in that situation, but from various states. It was a multi-state reporting kind of an incident. And then the last one really is one that catches my attention because this could have been catastrophic, but bullet number 4, a hacker posing as a Microsoft official installed man-in-the-browser malware. Have you heard of that? Man-in-the-browser hot malware. So he goes online, and someone's working on a weekend, and they're a financial officer at one of our universities. They're working online, and hackers can figure out how to break into systems and find out who's online. So he found out that she was online, and he gets on with her and says, "Your system's really slow. I can come on and help you speed your system up. Just give me access to your stuff." So she fell for that scheme, and the hacker got in, and she noticed her computer suddenly got really slow, almost wouldn't work. And apparently some of that browser software was installed, and once that software is installed, they attempt to find out what your passwords are. If you're getting into your bank account, or if you're accessing the state's accounting and budgeting and human resources system, or other personal information, then that man-in-the-browser software tracks keystrokes and can actually find out what the passwords is and help that cyber criminal get in to financial accounts, banking accounts, and so on and so forth. So she notified her IT people. They shut the system down immediately, intervened. She had a gut feeling that something was wrong, and that got shut down and it got mitigated and taken care of. But just some examples of what happened in Montana, so that you're aware that they're real. And hopefully they never happen here. You guys, like I said, have been a teacher's retirement system's been a pretty good player in our program, no incidents. So.
If I could ask a quick question, and Scott, you could probably help me on this too. Over the summer at the trustee workshop, they had a cybersecurity seminar, and didn't he say that if somebody's in the system kind of like live like that, if you shut your computer and turn it off, basically the threat is not present anymore, I guess in the immediate sense. They don't have access if you shut your computer off, or if you unplug it, if you close it, or whatever you stop it, I guess, in real time.
I'm not sure how that worked, but it would make sense. I mean, if you go down, you would think they go down. Then
Right, yeah, if you had
on
access to
network,
keystrokes and things,
and
and, yeah, okay. I wasn't sure if you remember, Scott, if that
No,
were the case.
I think that's true.
Okay.
Obviously, it depends on how long it took you to figure out.
Right,
the problem.
right.
Yeah. And you would hope that in the time that you were on, they didn't get that software out there. Because when
Right.
you log back in or go back on and out there,
Right.
they may have had the time to slip the software on to your financial programs and track your keystrokes. So
Right.
never a bad idea, although you may feel ashamed and there's probably a little fear of this, am I gonna get fired or something's gonna happen if I tell IT? I mean, what was I thinking? You know, better to tell them than prevent the virus from getting in and destroying software and doing physical damage to your computer. It can do all kinds of terrible things.
Yeah, and it really depends on the context that the person's in. You made
Right.
mention the fact, how did I get to this point where someone, we're all people, we all make mistakes, we all have our mind somewhere else when we're doing stuff, so we're just kind of compliant and do a bunch of stuff, and it's not until later on that you actually think about it. It can be a real problem.
Yeah. I can't, in all the instances we've had, I can't think of a single person that was terminated or dealt with harshly. I mean, it's what Scott said and what you've all said. I mean, we make mistakes. And they're smarter than we are when it comes to how software and IT structures work. So we're here to pick up the pieces and help you try to get that back on track. And I thought you might enjoy some of those examples and maybe learn from the 4 of the 55 you've received. Very different, each one of them a little bit different in its nature, about some of the schemes that we've seen out there and how they were thwarted and or dealt with if they were successful in actually obtaining that personal and private health information. So,
Having been a school administrator for a long time and really tied to the school technology side of stuff, I think the bigger question is what are you as an entity doing to protect yourself? Are you doing common sense kinds of things? Are you backing up your computers? Are you saving those copies off-site? Are you doing the things that need? Are you asking your employees to train on cybersecurity?
all very good points.
I do think we will see employees fired, because I think we will be expecting more of them as time goes on. And if they lose their laptop, if they have a weak password, if they have that moment where they just didn't think things through very well after they've had the training, I think you're going to see people fired.
We're all accountable, aren't we? We're accountable for the work that we do, and we're accountable for the information that we're responsible for. So there's a lot to be said for that. I would totally agree with that. We hope you never experience that. On a positive note, we hope that never comes to roost at the teacher's retirement system. And we appreciate all these really good questions you're sending my way. Next. So what are the costs? Maybe we've gone through some. I don't know that I need to go through all these, but we've talked about credit monitoring, call centers, damage. Can they get in with viruses and can they actually do physical damage to your computers and your hardware? Yeah. Media and media content, and that's covered under our cyber insurance program. Defense costs and settlements, yeah. I mean, in that incident that involved the Department of Public Health, that $1.3 million claim, that we actually only had $2 million in cyber insurance at that time. And the claim was a $2.6 million claim, so we spent the extra money out of my fund. I mean, if not us, then who? It's not like they had extra money sitting around where they could come up with that, but that came out of our fund and we paid for that. But we now have a program with a $7 million limit and better coverage than what we've had in the past. So, but defense costs, those can be running the millions. So, lost revenue streams, can it shut down your revenue if they get in and they hack? I don't know that your revenue, you don't have cafeterias, bookstores, athletic venues that produce revenue streams, or maybe I'm...
Schools.
Maybe
Well, our monthly contribution, I mean, if we were shut down.
Oh, your contribution.
Any
Okay.
length of time, that could be, that would cut in our revenue stream.
Forgive me for that, missing the obvious. And those revenue streams, you're reporting to us for property, so we're protecting those revenue streams. I think with, we don't insure revenue streams for taxes, because there's the assumption that, you can always, if there's an earthquake or things happen, you'll always be able to find a way to assess taxes. And those streams are in the trillions, and our property premium would be in the trillions if we insured those streams. But those revenue streams with cyber can be exposed. And so I think I've hit the rest of them. Ransoms, I might just mention that ransoms and ransomware, do you all know what that's about? I mean, they'll bait you, and then you take the bait, and then they'll say, we'll make this go away if you pay us some money. And we do have ransomware coverage in our cyber program. I think the limit for that is $75,000 in a ransom. We don't post that on our website. You know, that's a mistake that some public. Oh, we have ransomware coverage out there. You know, talk about inviting people to come and hold you up,
Yeah.
you know.
And they're gonna ask for a little more than what you've got.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And you should know that the governors in various states, our governor and others included, kind of look at that ransom thing with a jaundiced eye. Many states have legislation that say we're not going to pay ransoms, and we prohibit through cyber insurance or any mechanism the payment of ransoms. So I'm not saying that's right or wrong or good or bad. That's a policy decision that lawmakers and executive branch agencies have to make. But we don't yet have a law like that in Montana. We do have ransomware coverage with a very small limit. But that's the big thing right now. That's what's driving the cost of cyber insurance is ransomware claims. And it's practically pricing many carriers out of the business, the number of ransomware claims. Remediation, and then finally regulatory fines and penalties. So next. So I want to talk a little bit about our insurance, which is probably one of the more important reasons why I'm here today, to maybe give you a level of comfort that you have something in place if the board is exposed or your employees are exposed or your money's exposed. But the states and university systems commercial insurance policy, we've had that in place now for 12 years. We worked through one of the top 10 insurance brokerage firms in the country, Driver Alliance or Alliant Insurance Services. They specialize in governmental risk and in higher education risk. And the insurance coverage that we have is through Lloyd's of London, Beasley. It's a layered program. Do you all know what layered insurance means? We can't get enough coverage from one carrier. They'll say, we'll take one bite of the apple, we'll insure the first 2 million. But if you want more, you gotta go find somebody else to sit on top of our layer. We actually have 3 carriers involved in the cyber program. The first layer, I think, is in the range of 2 million, and then we layer up above that. There's 3 million above 2, and then 2 million above the underlying 5. So it's a 3-layer program. But the 2 carriers that sit above the primary layer agree to follow the farm, the underlying insurance coverage that we have with the first carrier. And Beasley is one of the preeminent insurance carriers in the world for cyber. Their vendor services are unparalleled. Vendor services meaning legal fees, legal assistance, forensics, call centers. When we had that IT breach involving public health, I actually got a call from a public official that said, you know, we need to start calling people and going out and hiring temporary workers to fill phone calls. And that, I'm not saying that to try to be funny. They didn't know how the call center systems works. Through the program we have through our insurance, these call centers do this for a living. They hire professionals that know how to take the questions, how to respond, and how to deal with the public when it comes to sometimes very penetrating and difficult questions about my personal information. What are you going to do to protect me? So all of that's built into the insurance program. I mentioned, I think in the sub-bullets, that it's a $7 million program limit. We had 10 million 2 years ago. We lost 3 million in coverage because of the market. You know, so we're at 7, which is in the range of where the states in the region are. I wouldn't buy 25 million like the state of Georgia. They have many more employees, state and university employees. They're much bigger. They have a lot more information. But what we have, we think fits for Montana with a $7 million limit through Lloyd's of London. We do have sub-limits for ransomware, mail notification, electronic funds transfer, and so on and so forth. I would tell you that we had 2 large claims over the past 3 years that involved electronic funds transfers. So be careful with those. We had, in 2 situations, cyber criminals posing as U.S. Bank that interrupted and took vendor transfer payments. In one case, I think $250,000, and got that money. And intercepted it. So I think the agency intended to pay the vendor. It was intercepted by a cyber criminal. The insurance covered that. And I know the controls have since been put in place to protect that from happening again. Hopefully it won't, but that's a very common scheme too, is posing an it's called vendor impersonation fraud, where these very intelligent cyber criminals will pose as U.S. Bank or someone else, and their logo looks exactly like U.S. Bank. Everything looks so official, then boom, you hit the button and U.S. Bank's, where's the money? and the vendor's saying, my money's not deposited, well, we sent it to US Bank, and you find out it's not that US Bank, it's a vendor impersonator. So that's another big area where we've seen that happen, is with wire transfers. So just be aware of that. We've set it up, our program, second bullet here, folks, to where the agency or university copay is 10% of the deductible. Our deductible is $250,000. So that's what we pay. We're gonna pay the first $250,000 of any cyber claim that you incur. Because, I mean, you're not really set up to make those kind of payments on claims. You know, you have funds that are fully dedicated and invested in retirement, but they're not to pay claims. So that's what we pick up, but your copay is 10%. So we want all of our agencies and universities to have skin in the game so that they're mindful that, you know, you mess up, you know, you're gonna pay and share in the loss with us. So that would be $25,000 would be your copay. And the few agencies that have had these incidences are happy to pay that,
Yeah.
because the incidents usually cost a lot more than the $25,000. Next. So what's the state of cyber insurance market? And you as the board need to know this, because not that you're expected to deal with it, we do in behalf of the entire board and with your TRS, but our liability carriers, bullet number 1, and why did they make that so small? Can you all see that?
I can blow it up some more.
It's a little small, isn't it? And I'm getting older and I'm a little more visually challenged. So, okay, thank you. Does that look better? For our people online, can you see that? Can you all see that?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, good, thank you. So what the carriers are requiring is for us to have better controls around the data and the information that we're protecting. So that's a requirement for most carriers. I would tell you that Andy Hanks, who's the state's chief security officer, responds and fills in most of the applications on the state side. And on the university side, their chief information officer does most of the applications. They're pretty exhaustive applications. They want to know what you're doing with encryption, multi-factor authentication, and there's a host of other questions. That's like a 5-page application that, believe me, you wouldn't want to try to fill out. That's technical, that the security and IT people take on and do. But they want to know more. They want to know what we're actually doing. They're not going to sit back and just simply pay claims and or agree to insure the state of Montana if we don't have controls in place. And as I mentioned, we've done pretty well compared with most other states. We're in the mix so we can actually find the insurance because we haven't had the incidents that other states have had. Although I would tell you that last July, the carriers went to my insurance agent and said, you know, we want to cut Montana's limit to $2 million or we might not insure you. And because we have really good brokers and we have really good agents, they said, wait a minute, time out. We haven't had the losses, that you just had a big claim in another state. Don't pin that loss on us and put us in the same basket with all the other eggs, because we've done better. We have better secure controls in place. We haven't had those incidences, and they agreed. So our program is intact and everything that we have and need is there. The pricing is beginning to smooth out. I would tell you that the pricing's tripled in the past 5 years. It's not something that affects you very much because we embed the cost of the cyber premium in your general liability rate. And your general liability rate has actually gone down. So we're absorbing the increased cost of your cyber insurance as an expense through our reserves, through our insurance reserves, and our reserve mechanisms. So that's not hitting your fund, it's not hitting you at all. We're picking up the tab. But
I'm sorry, Brett, if I can ask a question on bullet number 1. And I understand that people at the state level are filling out the applications and providing information on security parameters, et cetera. But to the extent that we manage those, some of those things and, you know, transactions internally, and that, is there, do you have a list, a sheet of program requirements for the cybersecurity insurance that we should be, and one in particular comes to mind. I've heard from a number of pension attorneys in other states that their cyber coverage now requires that they audit their vendors in order to not invalidate their cyber coverage, that they have to have controls over their vendors. So I guess I'm just wondering, broad picture, are there things that we should know that maybe we don't at this point?
Good question. There's no requirement currently that in Montana that we audit our vendors. There's not a requirement from our carriers that we currently do that. What I think I might do is just send you the application, because I think the application from the carrier addresses the concerns like, are you doing multi-factor authentication and this and that? So you know what Andy Hanks, what we've been responding, and he's kind of taken under himself. Imagine if we had to manage the collection of that information from hundreds of agencies, boards, councils, commissions, and universities. So he's kind of the point that responds to the questions. The fact that we only have him responding will not invalidate your coverage. They prefer a focal point. In the university system, we have a focal point. So, but I'll send you one of those applications, and that'll. But there's not a list per se of you got to do this, or you don't get coverage. They're looking at us from the standpoint, you haven't had many incidents, we're going to continue to cover you, but we'd kind of like to know what you're doing behind the scenes before we're going to do that. Does that make sense?
Yes, perfect, thank you.
And I hope it answered your question. I'll send it over to Denise, to you and John. You can distribute that as you see fit. I think third point, that's kind of what we just talked about. Seeing increases over expiring renewals. Our policies renew on July 1 every year. So we've been seeing increases. We're expecting more increases this coming July, but again, we're absorbing those increases for you. We're not passing them on. We're absorbing those through our reserve from general liability. But it is a concern for us because it's taking up an increasing portion of our revenue and what we collect in premium from agencies. So we're hoping at some point that stabilizes and doesn't continue to ascend in premium. Next slide, please. So personal information per Montana code, just again, what does that mean? Well, according to Montana code, Denise is pretty familiar with this, it's the first name or first initial and last name in combination with the following data elements. So when you look at what constitutes a breach, right? I shouldn't use the term breach, I should use an unauthorized disclosure. If it's information that involves the first name or first initial and last name in combination with those things that are indicated 1 through 6. Social security number, driver's license, account number, medical record, taxpayer ID, and so on and so forth. If that's released, then it could constitute an unauthorized disclosure if all of those elements are present. It does not include, point B, publicly held information from federal, state, local, or tribal governmental records. If it's already a matter of public record and it's out there, then that's excluded. They can't say, well, you breached information. You disclosed it when it's already public. So keep that in mind, personal information. When we get the call and we go to our carrier and we talk with their private counsel, it's one of the first things they look at is what information was released. And then secondly, if it was released, because people tried to come in and access it, their forensics will reveal how far they went, where they got. So hence the need to not go out and start making assertions that there's a breach when there needs to be a process where we vet it legally, and it goes through Denise and privacy counsel attorneys, and we all agree that maybe there was or wasn't a full-blown on unauthorized disclosure, but might be good just to let people know anyway. Next slide. So the term breach, I mentioned, has legal significance and it varies on a multitude of different state and federal laws. We say that if you ever have something happen, don't call it a breach. Let's refer to it as an incident. Something happened, we've reported to the state, the insurance carrier. So if it happens and you're worried that something might have gone on, give us a call. And not that we want to be controlling, but give us a call, and then we'll put the carrier on notice. Our carrier and their privacy counsel will work with Denise, and Denise will vet it and involve whoever needs to be involved. I'm sure that Sean and the board would probably want to know about that. And then it's closely held until we determine what actually happened. Was there a need to notify, and was there, under these definitions, something that requires us to go out and offer credit monitoring and do all those things? So for purposes, bullet number 2, for purpose of reporting potential incidents to the Department of Administration, a breach means the unauthorized acquisition of data information that A, materially compromises the security, confidentiality, or integrity of the personal information maintained by the agency or university, and B, causes or is reasonably believed to cause loss or injury to a person. Now, some states don't have that. Some states it's just, it was unauthorized and disclosed. You gotta go tell everybody. I think Montana is that it's unauthorized and disclosed if it meets the definition of personal information, but there needs to be, you know, a potential loss or injury or reasonably believed to cause harm. Even then, our carriers are cautious, and in many cases, they'll say, well, could or could it not cause harm? We should probably, out of an abundance of caution, just let people know. So that's kind of the way they look at it. Any questions on what is a breach? This is important, and what is personal and private information? And then again, the takeaway, be really careful with the use of the term breach as opposed to incident. Next. So step 1 is to notify internal stakeholders, meaning that bullet 1, upon discovery of the release, immediately notify internal stakeholders. So, you know, if it's your IT people, you know, or whoever, they're gonna, of course, let Denise know and Sean, and whoever you all decide you need to let know, then that's fine. If it occurs during normal business hours, call us. If not, our phone numbers roll over to our claims people, and you can easily be reached. It'll roll over to 1 of 5 people there if it occurs after hours. And then we'll get hold of the carrier as soon as we can and privacy counsel. It might not be till the following Monday if it's a weekend, but they will be made to know as soon as possible. And you need to complete the report of incident. That's on our website under claims. So if something happens, complete that report of incidents, kind of like the first report of injury for workers' comp, although the angle is liability, property, and cyber. So complete that and send it over to Jenny Yunkin of our staff, or you can send it to me. I should probably put that name up here, but let us know, and we'll get that first thing, and then we'll be in contact and begin to kind of get the ball rolling. And written correspondence refer to the situation as an incident, not a breach. Next slide. Step 2, we will escalate as necessary. We've talked about the steps. We'll report it to the carrier, put privacy counsel on notice. We'll do that without undue reasonable delay. We're not going to wait a week. We want them to know right away, usually same day, usually same hour. But we know we're going to try to get hold of Baker Hostetler in New York, or privacy counsel in Texas or in California. We call Beasley, the carrier. They have claims people that we work with as well. Our brokers are made to know and kept in the know about what happens. And then we escalate and we take these steps. Bullet number 3, I think I asked the question, how long would it take you all to print and mail 5,000 letters? We talked about that before. You don't have the capabilities to do that. I mean, Sean's got some very hardworking staff, but I mean, wouldn't be very productive, would it, for you all to start sitting down and typing letters when it can all be automated and done in a much different, more effective way. Public relations consultants and crisis management is part of the insurance. Call center vendors. In the breach with the Department of Public Health, there were actually 3 call centers set up. 1 for employees, because their data was affected, 1 for the public, and I think we had 1 for legislators and elected officials. So a little bit different response mechanism for each one of the 3. Credit monitoring vendors and others as necessary. Next. So risk management strategies. Question remains: what are you going to put in your personal devices? You know, we talked about laptops, iPads, phones. What you put there may ultimately determine whether or not there's an incident or a breach. And then what are you going to email to your personal accounts? You know, we actually had a bit of a humorous note, but we actually had a cyber incident where an employee had personal information on his own computer, which was a no-no, you know, but his own personal information contained some of his own personal stuff, you know, his own personal email and social security number and some of that stuff, but along with other private information from the agency. So I think management had a long talk with that person about making sure you don't put your private information, social security numbers and stuff on your state computer or laptop, because number 1, that's personal use as opposed to an official use. And then be careful what you send to your email accounts. Are you like me? I mean, sometimes when I'm busy, I'll shoot a mail to myself. email to myself, follow up and get with Sean or somebody else on Monday. Make sure you're at the board meeting on Friday morning at 8:30, don't miss that. I'll send myself a little personal note, because I wouldn't want to not show up here when I made a commitment to be here. So I do that a lot to remind myself. I send myself lots of reminders. And I have to remind myself there's some things in there you want to be careful with when you're sending it to your personal mail. Next. Risk management strategies. There's some publications out there that our IT people would know more about. I'm not going to cover this in depth, but NIST, there's NIST or National, what does that stand for?
National Institute for Security Technology.
National Institute for Security and Technology. Now there's a prepared guy here.
I think
You want to
that's-
talk about it?
Can you
yeah, there
recite
was-
all the standards for us, John?
All of them, yeah, all of them. They're governing body for the industries for security standards implementation, and the states subscribe to or subscribe to following NIST standards for our security protocol. And so they're they compile and govern the standards nationally. And they're one of, there's more than one organization that maintains security standards. NIST is the one that the state of Montana has aligned with.
So when Denise asked that question, was there a set of things we should be doing, standards and things? Maybe NIST might be a good reference point for some of that, correct?
Yes.
So NIST has some wonderful resources, and like I said, clearly not as familiar as your IT people would be. This is IT driven and IT backdrop. So these kinds of things are the things that your IT people know about, that promote standards or promote adherence to standards so you avoid these cyber incidents. It sounds like he knows a lot about that, and he's probably done really well by you with respect to security on your IT system. So thank you for sharing that. I'm not an expert with NIST, for sure. And then I guess, I don't want to wear out my welcome. It's been great to be here, but I'm more than happy to take any questions that the board or its employees may have at this point.
So if.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Dee.
Oh, thank you. Dee Brown here again, remote. Did I hear you say that you are going to absorb the increased costs for the next year?
Dee, that's correct. Our cyber insurance is tripled. We're not passing that on to the agencies through our premium allocation. We have a general liability premium, and we basically assess that to every agency and university, a portion of that premium. And what's built into the cost is the cyber. So we're absorbing that expense component in the general liability and not passing that on. That's correct.
Okay, and that always makes me scratch my head to say, are the costs too high if you can afford to absorb the increased costs?
You know, it's an excellent question. So, you know, the premium for our general liability is in the range, we collect about $13 million a year, and we use actuaries like you all do. They'll look at your fund and you have target funding ratios. We do the same. We use an actuarial firm, and we're driven by our target funding ratios. We're not in the business trying to keep a lot of extra money that the legislature and others could use and benefit from to serve the citizens. So, no, we collect $13 million. One of the components in that $13 million on the expense side is cyber. As I recall, our cyber premium is in the range of about $500,000 a year. It's doubled or tripled in the last 3 or 4. So it's gone up, but we're not taking the $13 million and increasing that to you all, how much we're charging your portion of that. We're just saying to ourselves, they can't afford it. We think it's important. You know, we've thought about ditching the cyber, but if not us, then who? You know, it's becoming,
All right.
it's important.
And Sean, I have a question for you. I'm wondering how TRS chooses our risk manager. I mean, do you go out and get bids? I mean, exactly how do we do this?
So that's what Brett is for us, essentially, is our risk management. Risk management and tort division is going to always handle our cyber claims. In fact, I was going to just ask a question, which I already know the answer to, just so Brett could expand on it. Every time we go to these conferences, there's typically a cyber insurance provider at them, and inevitably the question comes up, well, should we buy more cyber insurance on top of the insurance that you're already providing? And I'll let you go ahead and answer that question because I know that the answer is no.
It's a very good question. But so you all heard that, we have the 7 million limit. Should you have more insurance coverage than what we currently have? We can't predict what a claim's gonna cost in the future. I mean, if some hackers got in and took, did more with the data and it ended up being a $20 million claim, we have a $7 million limit. What I can tell you is the largest claim to date has been 2.5 million. So it wouldn't really justify going out and buying a 15 or a $20 million limit when we've never had a claim above 2.5. And in terms of population, we don't have the population that Utah or Georgia or other states have. The limits that we have are in the ballpark of what other states, Mountain West states have, like Wyoming, Colorado, I don't know, North Dakota, South Dakota. We're in the ballpark. Because the broker for those states, the insurance agents for those states is the same agent as for Montana. They specialize in states. So I think we're where we need to be. But no, what if you did have a claim over 20 million? And it exceeded and breached the limit of your insurance, who's gonna pay? Well, that's what we do. I think we then go to the legislature and we say, come on, that's what we do. I think we're gonna be looked to make up the difference, quite
All
frankly.
right, thank you.
And we're willing to do that. I mean, it won't make, for me to end up with the $13 million and have to come up with it somewhere, the legislature gets it. VU served honorably in the legislature, and the legislature, in my experience, wants to do the right thing. So if I have to come up with another 13 million and I don't have it in my fund, or it breaks down my reserves and messes up our actual projections, my experience has been the legislature has been pretty quick to come in and help with an expectation that we pay it back over time, a general fund loan or something, and we've done that on more than one occasion.
It's not in your checkbook, in other words.
Yeah, and there's certain things you can't predict, that you can't budget. They're not budgetably routine. So,
Thank you.
you try to do the best you can.
Question that I had, Mr. Dahl. I think all of us understand the importance of PPI and that risk management. One of the things that I tend to lose more sleep on are the operational kinds of things that could happen that would prevent us from paying our retirees and the potential losses as a result of that. We haven't talked at all about that kind of risk, but where does that fit in this?
You're referring to fiduciary risk and liability and responsibility.
For example, let's say somebody, maybe it's a ransomware in our M-Trust program that we write our checks out of, or we get our data from, something like that.
Yeah. If it's a covered loss, and we have a program for crime, we have a crime insurance program that's very large, that covers and picks up the costs of electronic burglary, theft, and cash. So there's actually a redundancy, a little bit of redundancy between that and the cyber. The cyber picks up some of that too. So I think we got the fraud that can happen financially. If someone came in and defrauded you from your funds of money, we got that covered through our prime program. Now I would tell you, and having said that the limits that we have that are available aren't high. They're 1 or 2 million. And if you had a $5 million claim, again, what do we do? I think you look to us and say, or the legislature looks to us and say, who has the money in their fund, or who can get the money, and who's in the best position to do this? I wouldn't want to speak for my administration, my boss, and say it would be us, but in the past, that's what's happened. In the past, we've picked up the costs of things that exceeded insurance and tried to help out. That's been our strategy. So, again, we don't want to staff up and buy insurance and have 30 million for a bunch of stuff that could never happen. It's very expensive. And we've looked at fiduciary before. I think I did a rough quote 12 or 15 years ago, because I think I had someone from the public employee retirement system call me. And under our self-insured program, keep in mind we're self-insured for liability, the definition of a tort is any claim, a monetary claim for personal injury or property damage. So fiduciary liability, they're torts. So the question has always been, do we want to go out and buy specialty coverage for fiduciary liability, when we know it's gonna be expensive, number one, and I know that they won't give me a high limit, they're not gonna give me a $100 million limit. And they're not gonna give me a $500 million limit. They may give me a $2 or a $5 million limit, and it'll be expensive, you know? So those are bridges that I think we cross when we get there. I mean, we could go out and look at a fiduciary quote for you, and we could quote it and find out what it costs. And look at that at some point in time, and we would be willing to do that.
From the insurance side of things, that may or may not make sense. I guess part of the risk management, however, is making sure the state government is protecting their systems and their, their aspects. And so I assume there's a whole lot of stuff going on there that I'm sure John could talk about that try to mitigate that kind of problem. I just worry about, there's a retiree that probably not too far from my wife that gets a benefit, and 3 or 4 days later, a direct deposit goes in for mortgage, and then, bills come out after all of that stuff. So I worry about the individual retirees as much as anything else.
Yeah.
So, just in that example isn't all that different than if we had a major natural disaster, right? Let's say M-Trust is not able to run because it's locked down by ransomware. Our potential losses would be pretty minimal, because at worst, we would just rerun last month's payroll as long as Sabre can go. They have that payroll file, so they could regenerate it at the end of the next month and the end of the next month if they had to. So the only people that would be missing off of that would be anyone brand newly loaded and hasn't been paid yet, or people that potentially were deceased and should come off. And so we'd be talking about really small percentages that aren't gonna get a check that day they're supposed to, until it's resolved.
Well, yeah, I think I understand that very well. I'm it just reminds me that the trust factor associated with all of that becomes maybe even a bigger player in all of this than the actual cost of the problem.
Yeah, it's difficult. Dee asked who your risk manager was, and, I'd like to say I am, because I work with Denise and we work with Sean, and we try to manage your risks in terms of the insurable risks, and we deal with contracts and different things. Workers' comp's kind of a different critter, but I would tell you that, are there bags under my eyes? Maybe a few. I do lose a little sleep at night, but, when it comes to certain things that involve catastrophes, and I'm not saying this to try in any way assuage your fears, but, the state owns dams. Natural Resources owns dams. I remember one point in time I had this discussion with some people over there about their dams, and they're putting money into the dams to fix them. They're old, they've got cracks. They're trying to fix them and repair them, but they wanted me to look at insurance for the dam. And we went out to Lloyd's of London, and we found a policy that we could get that would provide $100 million in coverage for dam liability, downstream liability for people who would be affected if one of those dams broke. But how much do you think that cost me? It's going to cost me $3 million a year to get a $100 million limit. And that would in no way even begin to address the people who would be affected downstream over 50 or 60 miles from the breakage of a particular dam. So I share that with you only because insurance not always the best solution. And you should know that these people that are out there that are underwriters don't have unlimited funds. And they're looking at risk kind of the same way we are, is, man, if I agree to insure $100 million for all of the state's dams and where they're at, I need to be compensated, so if it happens, I can cover at least a portion of that. So these are difficult times for insurance too. I would tell you that the markets are really tough. And this is the historic worst it's ever been for insurance companies worldwide. There's a total of 4 cyber carriers, 5 that are really players. There used to be 30. We deal with Lexington, who's one of the largest organizations in the world on your property program, one of the largest in the world. They're an AIG company, and so they're very good and they're highly rated. We try to work with very, very good carriers to make sure that we have the protection you need. But it's a difficult call. You can always try to find more insurance, but in this market it's going to be expensive, and you might not be able to get what you think you want, what you need, because of the conditions and where it's at.
Thank you.
Not to scare anybody, but that's just kind of the reality of what we're dealing with now with the industry.
Any other questions? Well, we sincerely appreciate your time. This is really important, and I know after seeing presentation after presentation at the conferences and workshops, it's all, it's just good to continually have the conversation as new things develop and everything. So we really appreciate your time coming
Thank you.
today.
Thank you for the invitation. Have a nice holiday.
You too. Thank you.
Thanks again.
Public comment? Any public comment? Yes, ma'am.
Sure. Sarah Piper with the Montana Federation of Public Employees. I just wanted to say thank you all for the work that goes into protecting information here. Speaking both on behalf of our members and as somebody whose information is in this building, it's incredibly reassuring the number of security steps that are involved and the thought that goes into all of this here at TRS to keep member data secure and safe, both for our currently working members who are putting money on account here for their future retirement and for the retirees who rely on that as their pension. So thank you all. This was incredibly informative.
Okay, any other public comments? No? Okay, we've got a break scheduled until 10:15 and we'll come back then. Okay, so we're moving on to the administrative business and we'll start with the investment report by Daniel Frost.
Hey guys, excuse my voice here. I'm recovering from a cold. I'm not quite there yet. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So last meeting was over a month ago. The returns, as you can see, through the end of October are pretty poor. Looking at a minus 8.5%. The nice thing is that the since inception numbers are still above target. And November was really good, so that's not reflected here yet. I think we had almost a 10% increase between the Dow and the S&P, give or take, in November. So that hopefully things will look a little bit better when next month's number come out. There is a lag, as I mentioned last time, there's a lag in the private and real estate investments that we hold an awful lot of. And so it'll be interesting to see how the year ends out. If the more typical asset classes in the year well, but maybe the lag starts to catch up and values decline there, it'll be interesting to see how that sits. It appears that inflation is now slowing a bit. That's what the latest numbers look like. Markets in November really liked that idea, and so shot forward quite a bit pretty quickly. But we're still down about 15% on the S&P. NASDAQ is still down about 25%. So we still got a long way to go to get back. And again, that since inception number is still looking okay. I think the most important thing we worked on or talked about during the meeting was the allocation changes, some changes to ranges and midpoints. The way that they approach that is the entire investment team goes out to Portland for a few days with RBK, the consultants that help make such decisions, and they look at our current assets, look at all the liabilities that we need to cover, look at how other public investors are allocated, and then look at opportunities and risks going forward. And I think the major takeaway I got from the changes that were proposed and approved, the major changes, I think, were based on us being comfortable with the way markets have shifted a little bit and not wanting to do a hard rebalance and sell illiquid assets just to try to rebalance back to where things should be. But I'll run through kind of the changes. Domestic equity, we dropped the midpoint 1%. International equity, we dropped 2%. Private investments up 1%. Real estate and real assets both up 1%. Fixed income and cash didn't change. So really minor shifts. That's kind of the way that I think things always work with the Board of Investments is you just make some minor adjustments around those midpoints. We discussed the idea that fixed income has now become a lot more attractive, and maybe that midpoint should move up a little bit. But the way that John described that was that we did not change neither the midpoint nor the range. The range still allows for him to go another 5% above where fixed income is right now. And if rates keep going up, he will likely exceed that midpoint. And that's okay. I mean, the ranges are really what he's required to stay within. The midpoints are not targets. They're just kind of an idea of where that range sits. He does discuss if he's off the midpoint, of course, but it's not necessarily a target, if that makes sense. Any questions? All right, the other interesting thing we talked about, every other year, we hire a place called CEM Benchmarking to do a really deep dive into our fees and returns. And it's a 5-year average that they're looking at. I think it helps us to see where we are relative to other public investors, and it helps that even more, I think, with our ability to negotiate with managers. Because if it looks like we're paying more than everybody else, we can go to those managers and say, hey, you got to give us a break. And we've used that in the past for sure. That report looked pretty good. Our best savings comes from the fact that we do our own internal fixed income management. So we were a few basis points cheaper than everybody else on our fixed income side. Our overall cost was actually slightly higher than peer, but mostly because we have a slightly higher percentage of assets in private equity, private real estate, and private debt. And those are just by definition, they're a little bit more expensive. The other thing to keep in mind is it is a 5-year average. We just did a big negotiation and reduction of fees a couple years ago. So those aren't fully included in that average yet. And I guess at the end of the day, the good news is that our returns were actually above peer by a couple of basis points, even though our costs were also above peer, about 3 basis points. So our implementation gave us 5 basis points. About 3 of that was chewed up in higher fees, and about 2 of that we beat our peers. The last thing, I think I mentioned last meeting that we were in the process of hiring a new head of private investments. We did do that, and it's public now. It's Thomas Winkler. He was an internal analyst, just a really, really good fit for that position. They did interview all sorts of people, but he got the job, and I think everybody's really pleased about that. That's all I got. If there's any questions, happy to answer them.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to the financial statements and budget reports. Thanks, Dan, for your report on the investments.
Thank you. All right, so we're looking at the balance sheet on page 43 as of October 31st, 2022. There's also the comparatives for October 31st of 2021 on there. So as you can see, not a lot of changes, really meaningful changes, except for in the CAP pool, the consolidated asset pension pool, and that is down about $600 million due to a lot of what Member Trost just spoke about. So that's going to be the big outlier here throughout the financial statements. If anyone has any questions, feel free to let me know. But on the asset side, down about $600 million, and almost all of that is contributed to the cap pool. And the intangible, the one difference you'll see is that intangible right to use the building. That's just a new GASB statement that came out that we have to disclose, our lease for the building as an asset that's being amortized, and also on the liability side as a standard lease instead of just an expense like we always used to. So so those are going to be the big differences there that you see in the total other assets. That, you know, that it's up about, you know, $2 million, but the majority of that is that intangible right to use the building. And also our total liabilities are, you know, up about 2.8 million, and that's all the that standard lease, the majority of it. So anyone have any questions? You will see, you know, as we move on to the next page, that year-to-date income there, kind of towards the bottom, in comparison to last year. We get into further details on the next page. So our investment revenue as of this point last year was still, you know, positive 72 million, and this year it's negative 137 million. But again, that, you know, doesn't reflect the November, as Member Trost just let us know that November was a much better month. So these numbers do not reflect those gains. Basically, all the you know, as you go down, the rest of our expenses are very much in line with where we would expect them to be. Our benefit payments are kind of always on the rise as you know, more people retire through the system. And our withdrawals are actually down a little bit compared to last year, which is sort of what we anticipated. We had a big push for you know, the dormant letters that we were sending out. But yeah, no other really big changes. But the bottom line is that with our total revenues and total expenses, we're about, you know, negative 100 or 226 million this year, whereas last year we just had a small negative as of October 31st. And you can see the next page is just kind of the source of those expenses and revenue. The majority of it is our depreciation of well, in this case, depreciation of our investments. You know, 100 or about 23 million last year. You know, positive appreciation, and this year it's 167 million negative, or in the red there. So, and then our total admin expenses are, you know, very similar to what they were last year. So, any questions on any of the financial statements? The operating budget on page 46. The majority of this 80,000, you know, projected budget surplus is just from vacancy savings. We had several open positions kind of throughout the year. You know, I think all of those are filled currently, but just the nature of having them open throughout the year, we'll see some savings there, or some surplus there. Projected to have around 100 to 150,000 in operating expense, or in the operating surplus. So, you know, probably somewhere between 150 to 250,000 surplus is kind of where we're looking. We're still only 33% through the fiscal year, so that's kind of where I would expect it to be. This, you know, particular budget has it at exactly 233, but obviously we won't hit that right on the head. So,
Sean, if you
go ahead.
Sean, if you could address something that came up in a recent audit. How do we go about, very briefly, how do we go about increasing salaries at TRS so that we don't get in the same trouble as the Montana Library Association, or Montana Library?
So, I'll tell you our process. I'm not really familiar with what happened with the library, but for TRS, we have a personnel committee, and Tammy and I meet with that personnel committee usually prior to the May board meeting. So Tammy and I will do some analysis of where everyone sits as far as pay. And then we'll make recommendations to that personnel committee, and then the personnel committee makes recommendations to the whole board. And if you remember from last May was the first year of implementing broadband 25, so that was a new implementation for us. And if you remember our discussion surrounding that, that's still a work in progress, I guess. We had a lot of years under broadband 20, and we had that dialed in essentially to a science where we had really firm targets and sort of firm timelines to make it make sense pay-wise for comparable positions within the agency. And now with the sort of drastic changes in some cases that occurred with broadband 25, we can't take that exact same approach. So we do have an approach, and we've utilized it once, and we'll continue to make it better. I guess I'm not sure what happened with library. I'm sort of gathering just from your statement that there may have been some increases given that were maybe higher than what people think are appropriate.
Well, I think what happened is that there were no written standards, so 2 or 3 people got together in a room and started giving each other raises.
Yeah, no, so we do have a pay plan policy, the board has already approved. And then the whole process is laid out in that policy, which includes, like I said, the recommendation first and foremost coming from the personnel committee, and then the whole board ultimately approving any kind of raises like that.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions on the operating budget as of October 31st? The next page, page 47, is just our largest category of expenses. It's the contracted services, and since we just spoke about it, I guess I'd just point out the insurance and bonds, the 62104 account. That's what we pay. That's what we pay. It's a fixed cost. That's what we pay risk management, tort defense for our insurance. So it's about $6,200 at this point. I mean, obviously that's fixed. We get the budget every for a buy-in for 2 years. So that's around that is what we'll expect to pay next year too. So. Any questions on any of those? And then I guess the last page, 48, is just our delinquent agency reports, and we didn't have any as of basically all of the September reports were in as of 11/4. I think currently, since it's past the 15th of November, there is maybe one small school that hasn't got their October report in, but obviously I'm in contact with those folks, and they usually have a reason for those situations. That's all I have.
Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda, the NCTR annual conference report, with Sean, Dee, and myself. Sean,
You want me to go first?
Well, you're first on the list, so I know.
So I guess this is just a verbal report. The board authorized myself, Member Brown, and Member Hitchcock to attend the NCTR conference in Tucson, Arizona. I thought it was a good conference. There were various sessions with speakers that spoke to us. There was an actuarial panel that I thought was interesting, and I know Sarah already mentioned that wasn't as interesting for her. And then there was also an NCPERS, NERS, National Institute for Retirement Security, it was one of the very last sessions, but they took a look at, how systems have rebounded since the recession, and they have an, actually out on their website, which is just nersonline.org. They have the whole report's available out there. And it's interesting, that since the recession, funding levels, like funded ratios, haven't really improved that much. But the reason for that is because in the years since recovery, all systems have adopted more conservative assumptions. So even though the funded ratios haven't gotten improved dramatically, their observation is that all systems for the most part are on firmer footing than they were previously, just because of the adoption of those more conservative assumptions. And what we've done in Montana in our last two experience studies, I think, mirror that exactly. Just even our last one last May, we adopted more conservative assumptions again. I won't steal all the fun. I'll let Sarah and Dee talk about some of the other speakers, but there was one, and I'm sure they'll touch on it too. Manuel, I gotta find his name here. He was, I think he was the author of Freedom Riders, and there's a movie called Freedom Riders, and it's based on
He was one of the kids in the classroom.
Right, he was one of the kids in the classroom.
Yeah.
And he was amazing. I just wrote on here, amazing. Dr. Manuel Scott, yeah. He was came from a very tough background and dropped out of school at the age of 14 and now holds a couple doctorates and is very successful, but had a really rough childhood.
Well, the whole story is amazing.
Yeah.
His story is really something.
Yeah, it is. And he was quite a speaker.
Yeah.
He was very animated. Yeah. I think half the people in the room were crying by the time he was done.
I'm sure.
Yeah. So, I think with that, I'll let the two of you tell us.
Dee, would you like to dive in?
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with Sean. There were the board chose some excellent speakers. Each one of them actually told about at least one, if not two, of the people in their life who had touched them sometime during their schooling. And not only Dr. Scott, but Kurt Russell, the Teacher of the Year, was very eloquent. A man who was touched by his first black teacher, someone that looked like him. He's gone on to do good things in Oberlin, Ohio. He's taught for 2 decades. He's a history teacher, very involved in his community, and also the varsity head basketball coach. But I think what really impressed me was that the things that he's done in his school, from the Black Student Union to the new groups of inclusion, have decreased suspensions and behaviors, referrals in his school. And I think that's exactly what every good teacher, not only across the nation but in Montana, actually embody. The characteristics of every good teacher was found in Kurt Russell, and I think that we don't give ourselves enough credit or the people in the classroom enough credit, because they do touch lives. And we had some great food, and I'm sorry I didn't go.
Yeah, I'll just relay the same sentiments. The speakers were incredible. There was quite a variety of topics covered though as well, which was interesting, because more the technical actuarial stuff, the investment side. And then we of course had Dr. Scott, more of these engaging, emotional, personal accounts, but then politics came into the conversation too. There were several seminars that talked about the election, because at that point obviously it hadn't occurred, and kind of that outcome. They had, what was her name? Amy Walter from the Cook Political Report. She did an incredible job of giving like a completely non-biased outlook for what the election is going to look like, and it was really neat to hear her kind of explain that, because it really didn't have anything to do necessarily with retirement funds or anything like that. It was just, I thought, a really good overall,
State of the United States.
pretty much, and she was very insightful, so that was kind of refreshing to kind of get that because it was obviously very relevant. And what else? There was one, which we haven't quite talked about yet. The first speaker that they had was a professor from the Wharton School of Business, I think is where he was from, and talked about
Yes.
marketing. Okay, yeah, he talked about marketing, which it was really interesting to kind of think about, with a teacher's retirement program, how do you market that, right? Like, how do you make that attractive and cool, then it was really interesting to think about that and his perspective on trying to brand and market, essentially this product, right? And in that way, and it was really interesting because I don't think a lot of people have had that kind of mindset in this, in this field. So that kind of got me thinking, and of course with the teacher shortage and trying to use the retirement programs as incentives to retain teachers and recruit teachers. So all of those were all topics, and yeah, they did an amazing job. Lots and lots and lots of people, and it seemed that everybody benefited and enjoyed their time there, so.
Sarah, something else that I thought of, we not only had a real diverse group of people, but it was nice to be there with our director who had lots of experience going to these meetings and sort of giving us the background or the heads up. So I really appreciated that Sean was there, sort of being our mini teacher on the side.
Yeah, me too. I certainly appreciated that as well. Yeah.
Glad to do it.
Absolutely.
It was a good conference. So.
Yeah, it's good. Okay, so the next item is the tentative meeting dates for 2023, February 17th, May 5th, August 4th, August 6th, and December 1st. Any comments on those dates? I've looked at my calendar and my daughter's birthday is actually the 17th, so that might work out well to take a trip out of town. So that'll be good for us.
Hi, this is Dan Chamberlain. I will be out of town until the 18th
Okay.
in February. So
Look
if,
at pushing it
I
back.
don't know if that date's set in stone, but I could come the next week.
It's not. The only thing I would say is if we go before that, I'm gonna have bad conflicts on the Fridays before that because of wrestling. So if we went after,
What about after the
would
24th?
be fine with me. I mean, it would work for me, but it's more about you guys, so.
That would be fine with me. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm
Is
just
that
checking real
something
quick.
Is that something that could be done remotely? If
For
you're
me,
going-
no. I'll be on an airplane.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I'd be
The
fine.
Yes,
17th
Jana.
works for me.
The 24th works
I'm
for
okay
you?
with the 24th too.
Okay. Dee, what about you?
I prefer the 17th, but that's up to the group.
Work works.
Okay. Could you do remote on the 24th, Dee?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So then, do I need to make a motion to change the meeting date, or just we do
No,
that later?
well, so the next meeting, that's
That
the
part,
one,
okay.
yeah, where we will change it.
Okay.
And I'll just update this, yeah.
And any discussion on the remaining dates for 2023? Now it's time for public comment, if any. No? Okay.
And we don't need a motion or
We
vote or
don't, we
anything.
can just
it's
say the
a-
24th.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So the next meeting date will then be the 24th instead of the 17th.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, guys, I'm really sorry to be such a pain. I have a conflict on May 5th as well.
Oh. That's okay.
I'm really sorry.
That's okay.
No, I'm sorry we changed that to the following week. No, that's fine. Excuse me.
So no conflict?
No conflict. Yeah, they were thinking about doing my retirement party on the 5th, but they changed it to the 12th.
Nice.
Thanks.
Well, the 5th would work. We could party with you.
Sure.
Okay, perfect. All right, moving on to the executive director's report.
All right, Madam Vice Chair, members of the board, behind tab 5 in your packet is my write-up on the executive director's report. We were able to fill all of our vacant positions since our last meeting. It was sort of interesting. Our executive secretary that we hired, we're on our second one, I think, since then. So we had one that worked 2 days, and this wasn't the right fit. We were able to pull from that same hiring pool. And so Tina West has joined TRS, and she has been here since November 5th. She was doing some student teaching in the area, and she has previously taught English to adulting learners, both in the United States and outside the United States. And then in the retired payroll section, we were able to hire a new payroll specialist and a payroll technician. Becca Bremner joined TRS as a payroll specialist on November 15th, or 14th, excuse me. And she came from another state agency with over 9 years of relevant experience. And then Janine Whitley joined TRS on the same day, and she came to TRS with 17 years of work experience in state government. So we're happy to have all 3 of them on staff, and they're fitting into their new roles nicely. Moving on to the operations update, I just have a quick note in here. You know, at this point, we're several months into the implementation of the remote online work initiative that the governor rolled out, and just the update for the board is up to this point, it seems to be working just fine. We're still able to provide in-person coverage 5 days a week during core business hours. And everything is getting done and on time, and the accuracy of work still seems to be very high. We haven't dropped our standards or anything like that, so everything seems to be working well in that regard. And then I wanted to mention, just yesterday, I sat in on a meeting that was initiated by the governor's office, and it's going to touch you all as board members eventually. They contracted with a vendor to create Robert's Rules of Order training for all of the various governor-appointed board members and commissioners throughout state government. It's not quite fully developed at this point, but they had the meeting with us just to kind of let us know, us as being directors and legal counsel with each agency, to let us know this is going to be coming down the road. We will have to pay something for it. I think it's $75,000 total divided by all the agency boards out there, so our allocation should be fairly small. But it will be set up similar to, from the sounds of it, like the cyber training we did, where it's going to be modules, and then you can, and also, so there'll be some required modules, and then I think there'll also be some like just additional information modules if there's certain things that interest you as board members, like best practices maybe that potentially aren't part of the required, but that are things that other states do that you'll be able to view. We will have to, it sounds like I will be responsible for tracking that gets done, during the deadline or by the deadlines, so on and so forth. Certainly you'll all hear from me, or potentially even from the governor's office initially, when that is ready to roll out, and then I'll follow up with you and make sure that we get it done. But I think it will be good training. Yeah.
A question on that, do you think it'd be possible to work with OPI to get professional development credits for that, for those of us that have teaching licenses?
Possibly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question that I can pose to them, whether you get continuing ed credits.
Right.
Yep.
Yep, if you could do that. Yeah, no rush, obviously.
Yeah,
but-
no, I can do that. That may be something that they can do.
Okay, great.
So
That
that'll
sounds like a
just
great
kind of, I don't have a date for you at this point, but it will be coming in the next couple of months from the sounds of it. All right, moving on to B, the legislation update. So I pasted a screenshot from November 21st. This has changed a little bit. There are a couple of the PERS drafts available now that you can go out on the law's website and view, as well as our working retiree bill is out there and viewable as a PDF, and our MUSRP bill is out there and viewable as a PDF. I don't know yet for sure what some of Representative Moore's bills are gonna be. I saw one draft of a PERS bill that would require layered amortization, so I'd imagine that one of these other generally revised pension laws will be for TRS and layered amortization, similar to what he brought last session. But until the drafts are available for me to look at, I won't schedule a meeting with the legislation subcommittee until they're out there and they're actually introduced, and then we will meet to decide on TRS's position for each of those bills that aren't brought by us. I think I already informed you at our last meeting, Representative Bartolio is going to carry our working retiree bill and our housekeeping bill, so that those two will start in the House, and then Senator Lynch is going to carry our university system bill, so it will start in the Senate. Are there any questions about the legislation?
Yes, Sean, I do have a question. When you said Representative Moore has 4 placeholders, I noticed that he wasn't on the SABA committee, and last session he had that actuary employment. Is there any more talk about that one coming back?
Sorry, so when you say actuary employment, can you, I'm not remember.
His House Bill 323 from last session that failed.
Is that the one that had the layered amortization in it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, and that's what I was referencing. I have seen a draft, it's not available publicly yet, but I saw a draft where that is going to be proposed for PERS, so I think that's one of those placeholders. And then, like, all I was saying is I won't be surprised if one of the other placeholders at least is for TRS and a similar layered amortization approach, but I don't know that yet at this point.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. All right, moving on to C. The SABA committee met on October 26th. I presented our evaluation results to the committee. I fielded a few questions, sort of the run-of-the-mill normal questions. The committee seemed to be pretty positive about the TRS amortizing in 25 years. It's obviously it's below the 30-year threshold. I will say that the committee, for the first time, I think since I've been director at TRS, prior to that, I think going into the 2013 session, I think the SABA committee approved a couple of funding bills as committee bills, their own bills, not necessarily on behalf of PERS, but this time, and I don't know if it's a result of that interim study, the HJ8 interim study, or just the makeup of the committee itself, but they did approve several of their own committee bills to address the funding shortfall in the safety systems, and also to address, add another 1% in total, so it's 0.1% for 10 years to PERS contribution rates to address the funding shortfall in PERS, because currently they amortize in 32 years. So I think it's public knowledge at this point as well that in the governor's budget, he allocated over $100 million in one-time funding for the public safety systems. So and then I don't think he has a provision specifically for PERS, but that may or may not come to pass. But it looks, at least from what I can tell, that there's going to be a concerted effort to try to shore up those public safety systems this session. Moving on, if there's no questions, the only update I have at this point for BOI and LFC both is that those meetings are upcoming. I will present the results of our evaluation to the Board of Investments next week on December 6th. And then Denise will go present the evaluation results to the LFC on December 9th, because I won't be available that day. Are there any questions for me?
Time for public comment. Cool. Thank you, Sean, for your report. We'll go ahead and move on to strategic planning.
All right. Vice Chair, members of the board, behind tab 6, we have the strategic planning section. Sorry, let me catch up the electronic version here. So every meeting, we take some time to review updates to, or usually it's because we've either completed something or decided to forego something on our strategic plan. The update for this meeting is there have been no updates since the last meeting. There's nothing in red font, which means I didn't update any of the priority timeline or the whether or not it's been completed. So currently, everything is underway. Nothing has changed on this since last meeting, so I guess I'm happy to answer any questions if board members have them, but I don't think it's probably worthwhile to step through each one. Everything is still the same. Everything is on track. It's supposed to be. We just haven't had anything to update since last meeting as far as completions.
Any questions by any of the board members for discussion? Okay, public comment? I don't think there's any public. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to board training.
Very good. Madam Vice Chair, members of the board, so we always, this time of year, do two things, the ethics and conflict of interest training and the per diem, and I always do them in opposite order. They're in the agenda. So I apologize for that. It's just easier to go through the per diem form very quickly before I bore you all to tears with ethics and conflict of interest. So as you all recall, on page 67 is the board per diem election form. You can't, by Montana law, be compensated twice by public entities for one period of work service. So today, the meeting that you're attending, for those of you who are also employed by a school district or another public entity, and I'm guessing the school districts are it, you can either receive the per diem for attending the meeting, or you can be paid by your employer for it, but you cannot do both. That doesn't count if you are on taking annual leave, personal leave time to be here at the meeting. If you're being paid for annual leave from your employer, it does not violate the requirement. You can receive both compensation for vacation time, leave time, whatever the case may be, as well as the per diem for attending the board meeting. Per diem, the prohibition doesn't include the amount you're paid for the $50 for preparation for the meeting. It's assumed that you do that in off-hour times, that you're not using work time of your normal employment to prepare for the meeting. So that's not included in the prohibition, nor is reimbursement for your travel costs, hotel rooms, that sort of thing. So it really is the $50, the amount of time that you're spending at a meeting. And I'm sorry, I don't even really know this. Do you get $50 per day per diem for each day that you're attending a conference as well? Yeah.
Yeah, they do.
So
Yep.
that would apply as well if you're getting paid by your employer, by your school district for that time. So, and I'm sorry, I can print out, if you don't want to take the document out of your folder, I can print clean ones for you. But you need to identify which of the things applies to you. And frankly, mostly it's just so internally, it's most useful internally for us to know how to pay you for your board service time.
Denise,
Yes,
I sent in my ethics,
Yes,
but
and-
I need to send in that per diem also, don't I?
you do, yes, please.
So I was just going to interrupt you there and say, for everyone that's online, I'm going to stop share here for a minute so I'm not broadcasting everything to the whole world. And I will go and email you the clean copy of the per diem form and the ethics questionnaire. And if you can all just at your convenience print them off, sign them, and then scan them and email them back to me, that will work great.
Thank you.
So does anybody have any questions about the per diem election? You have any?
I'm happy to say that That is a lot more clear, having been a year into this in
Yes.
my school district,
Absolutely.
because that was an absolute nightmare, but thankfully the timing has worked out that all of our meetings have fallen on days where they're not work days, so I
Oh.
haven't had to, yes, I don't know how that happened, but it worked out very well in my favor that that's very clear now,
Very good.
so.
And of course, for those of you who are not otherwise employed by public entities, the first line is for you, and that's fairly simple. So if there are no questions about the per diem election form, we'll move on to ethical conduct and conflicts of interest. Just 2 points. First, we just did this training with TRS staff a week and a half or so ago. So they've all been through the training. We kind of timed it to catch all of our new people. So staff have all recently been through the training. The other thing is, last year I sent you out a list of the contracts that we have, the entities that vendors that we have contracts with. I didn't hear back from anybody that anybody had a conflict of interest with any of those. I did not, none of our vendors have changed. The list would be the same this year. And I'm sorry, I didn't print the list. We didn't include that in here. If anybody needs to see that again, let me know. But otherwise, the information hasn't changed. It's still the same vendors. If you didn't have a problem last year, I would assume you still don't have a problem this year. So every year I tell you that, so starting on page 56 is your board policy on ethical conduct and conflicts of interest. The state of Montana has substantial provisions on ethical conduct in Title II of the MCA. This policy is drafted to incorporate those requirements, as well as the sort of extended requirements that you have as the board members of TRS based on your fiduciary obligations to the system and our members. So again, while the state has a policy, has statutes out there, it's all sort of comprehensively covered in this policy, so this should sort of be, and of course our policy has things in it the state requirements don't. So this is, should be your first stop if you're looking for answers. I'm not gonna go through all of the definitions here again. I'm gonna, everybody has been through this training at least once or twice at this time. So, just sort of incorporating everything, and we'll talk about this again later on, but as board members of TRS, you do not wear two hats. The fundamental objective of this ethics policy is the notion that you serve the members of the retirement system, all of the members of the retirement system equally and equitably, but you don't serve the interests of your other employer, of the state of Montana in general, necessarily. I mean, we always work within state law, we comply with state requirements in management of the retirement system and that sort of thing, but the objective here always is we work in the best interests of our members and their beneficiaries. So we're prohibited from advancing private interests, and where you're concerned, private interests are other employment that you might have, business ownerships or business interests that you might have, or that family members of yours might have. So you do your work here for the benefit of the members and not to advance private interest, whether that's yours from a monetary standpoint. I always feel kind of stupid having this conversation with you all because we've never had an example, unlike Brett's presentation today, not a substantial example of any kind of conflict of interest or ethical violation on the part of our board members, but
Denise,
yes.
just a comment. When we were at our conference in the summer, we'd spent probably 3 hours on fiduciary responsibilities
Did you?
and conflicts of interest and whatever was really good.
Yeah.
But there was a statement made, much like what you just said, about how that applies to trustees as fiduciary respons- and I was surprised there were 5 or 6 people in that room that totally disagreed with that. In part because most of them appeared to be representatives on the board of their union,
Oh, yeah.
and they took offense to the fact that they were not representing their union in that setting. They were not, that they were expected to not represent their union, I guess. They wanted to disagree about that comment, and I was just kind of taken back.
That was pretty cut and
I
dry,
had
right?
never, I had never been in a meeting with trustees or anybody else where, you know, there was a group of people that literally said, that's not right.
Well,
Not in our state.
Oddly enough, I will tell you that there are states that have actually codified third-party interests in fiduciary duties. So, and the one that comes to mind immediately is the state of Minnesota has a provision that says that you have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayers of the state of Minnesota in your capacity as a board member for, now, in reality, that's not untrue. I mean, right? I mean, we all feel that, we all
Yeah.
deal with it, exactly.
Yeah.
But it sort of flies in the face of the legal construct of fiduciary duty, so I'm
There were a couple of university system type board representatives, a couple that represented the governor, and literally were told, this is who you're representing on that board. And I'm told, oh, wow.
I'm kind of not surprised by that, but there are probably also systems that have, I mean, we don't, we've talked in detail before about the notion and that it's a conflict of interest potentially to have people serving on the TRS board who are also members of TRS. Well, there's case law out there that makes very clear that your interests as members of the system are not divergent from every other participant in the system's interest in the system. Now, if you're representing a union or something like that, then that becomes a little trickier. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people who believe that they are representing the constituency that sent them there. And in some states, it's a requirement. There are pension plans, of course, there are union pension plans, and they are, there specifically because they represent the union. So, so yeah, no, it's always a fascinating conversation to have. Family members for this purpose, and this policy is drafted more broadly, essentially, because Montana is a very small community. Everybody knows everybody. It's hard to, to work anywhere and not know people that you're going to hire or supervise or regulate in some manner or another. So your family members are your spouse, your spouses or your spouse's ancestor, sibling, descendant, or the spouse, ancestor, sibling, or descendant of any of them. So you, your spouse, your parents, your children, your grandchildren, your wife's parents, brothers, sisters, etc. I mean, anybody that you sort of contemplate as being part of your family falls within the prohibition of, you don't do things to benefit your family members. Gift of substantial value is a gift with a value of $50 or more. It doesn't include food and beverages consumed on an occasion when participation in a charitable, civic, or community event bears a relationship to the public officers or public employee's office or employment directly related to official governmental duties. Now, I just read 2 lines there, I'm sorry. $50 is the gift value. If anybody tries to give you something that's of greater value than $50 and it is for your status as or your work on behalf of the Board of the Teachers Retirement System, you're legally prohibited from accepting it. And sometimes that's, you know, I've not ever had a board member, frankly, tell me that anybody has tried to give them anything. I think it's more generally gifts are given to the retirement system. I mean, typically, you know, what they are is not.
I had one when I was first on board.
Did you? Okay.
Former employee that was working for a software company.
All right.
Well,
It was kind of pretty obvious what it was.
yeah, interesting.
And what was really nice about it was Dave was there at the same time. And so when this individual left, I looked over to Dave, I said, you won't believe what he just offered.
Wow.
So,
Apparently, didn't have good ethics training back then. For him, I mean,
He'd
when he
been
was
around
an
when that
employee.
software company was doing our work. He'd have probably said that several times.
I was just gonna say, like, so the conferences we go to where we're paying to attend the conferences, I mean, some of those meals are probably $50 or
Sure.
more,
Yeah.
but certainly we're paying for those, they're not being paid for
No.
by a vendor or whatever, so.
No, but I mean, it is not uncommon for vendors and things like that, though, if you're, I mean, depending on who they are. Of course, the conference I go to every year is with Ice Miller, and I always go out to dinner with Ice Miller at the conference, and I always pay for my own dinner. Because typically it's gonna be in excess of $50, and I mean, even if it wasn't, I'd pay for my own dinner, but that, so you know, my rule of thumb always is if somebody is offering you anything of any amount of value and it seems to be in exchange for, you know, preferential treatment or that's what, I mean, clearly, you're not going to participate in those kinds of transactions regardless of the amount. Official act or official action is any vote, decision, recommendation, approval, disapproval, or other action, including inaction that involves the use of discretionary authority related to the administration, operation, and assets of TRS. So by and large, everything you as a board do as board members for TRS is, you know, implicates an official act or official action. It's not just board votes that you take, you know, it's anything you do where you're exercising your discretion as board members. It's all, you know, mostly going to be with respect to official board action, but also, you know, lobbying the legislature, or appearing in front of the legislature, those kinds of things. We'll talk about that in greater detail in a minute, but, and as well, transaction or business arrangement. All of the work that all TRS staff do and you do as board members in our day-to-day business operations, essentially, you know, hiring people, paying benefits, calculating benefits, making decisions in contested case matters, those kinds of things, all fall within the category of transactions or business arrangements. So pretty much everything we do is, you know, potentially contaminated by a conflict of interest or improper action. I'm not going to go through all of the employees shall and employees shall not. And I know you had, as Scott said, just significant conversation about fiduciary duties. But there's one thing on page 59 at the top of the page, it's subpart, it's 2J. And because we're going into a legislative session, I always think that this is valuable to have the conversation. You, aside from being TRS board members, you're also citizens of the state of Montana, and you always have the right to speak to the legislature, to make your views known, to advocate for certain positions and that sort of thing. And of course, if it's in a circumstance where it implicates the functioning or the, you know, the realm of the teacher's retirement system, then, you know, the requirement really is sort of two things. If you are advocating on your own behalf, if it's your personal position, you need to make it known to the legislative body that you're speaking to, that this is your personal, you're appearing in your personal capacity. If you are appearing in your official capacity as a board member, then the request is that you only represent positions when you're clear that as a whole, you as a board have decided that that's the position the retirement system is taking. So, you know, I always like to make sure people understand. We can't and we don't want to stop you from exercising your rights as a citizen to appear before the legislature, but you will be perceived as potentially, you know, representing TRS if you're not real clear about the capacity you're appearing in. In subpart B on 59, the loyalty exclusive benefit, the exclusive benefit rule again is sort of the colloquial term for what we just talked about. Your fiduciary obligation is that you represent the members of the retirement system and their beneficiaries and nobody else in doing the business that you do on behalf of TRS. You have the duty of prudence, which means you have to discharge your duties with the care, skill, prudence, and diligence under the circumstances then prevailing, that a prudent person acting in like capacity and familiar with similar matters would use in the conduct of the enterprise. I know that's all crazy, isn't it? When you listen to the board of, a little too much legalese in there. Every time we go through this, I think I really need to rewrite this policy. The Board of Investments frequently talks about the prudent expert rule, and they are subject to the prudent expert rule. They are required to act in the capacity of somebody with the expertise as financial investors and that sort of thing would have. You are not held to the prudent expert rule. You're held to a more generalized standard of prudence, largely because, as Sarah has indicated, she's not interested in being an actuary.
Things could change, you know. You never know.
Doesn't have the expertise and the training to be an actuary. You have a duty of delegation. Part of your duty of prudence is that you delegate the expert areas of action of the retirement system to people who are competent and qualified to do it. You do have a responsibility to oversee and be concerned about their level of expertise and their, you know, ability to perform the work you expect them to perform, but you're not expected to be actuarial experts, financial investment experts, etc. Prohibited transactions truly become an issue of a conflict of interest. You can't sell or exchange TRS assets, and we don't typically do that, or lease any property of the system to a person or entity for less than you know, market or adequate consideration. You don't do any of those things or that anyway. Lend money or other extension of credit, furnishing of goods, services, or facilities from the retirement system to any person or entity for less than adequate consideration. Transfer to or use by or for the benefit of any person or entity any assets of the retirement system for less than adequate consideration. Or acquire on behalf of the system any employer security, real property, or a loan. Those are all, I mean, again, they're sort of specifically stated expectations for the duty of prudence, but frankly, we're saved a lot of the fiduciary issues and a lot of the you know, I didn't mention this before, the concern for fiduciary coverage and that sort of thing by the fact that we don't invest. Here, the BOI does that. Most of the fiduciary complaints, most of the fiduciary litigation that you will see is related to investment matters, not benefit administration, that sort of thing. It does not happen, but it's far less common. A conflict of interest is a circumstance where a TRS board members or employees objectivity or independence in the performance of their duties or functions on behalf of the retirement system are or could appear to be impaired because of a private interest or other personal interest in a transaction or business arrangement, or by virtue of a relationship with a third party, with another person who's involved in a transaction or a business arrangement. So you can have a personal private interest in any entity, business, property, or any other thing of value which is or may be the object of or involved in a transaction or business arrangement of TRS. You can't have a I shouldn't say you can't have, you can, but it could be a conflict of interest. If you have a relationship with a person, family member, or friend who has or reasonably would be perceived as having a private interest related to a transaction or business arrangement of TRS. This, fairly simply, the most ready example of that is, and we haven't done it yet today because most everybody is remote, but every board meeting when we're going to be looking at disability applicants, I will show you the name, where they teach and where they live of the people who will be appearing before the board essentially, at least on paper, for disability applicants and applications, and ask you whether you know them. And if your answer were to be, oh yes, I know them, then the follow-up question would be, well, how do you know them? How well do you know them? What's your relationship? Are you aware of the issue that they're here? And I don't believe we've had anybody have to put a conflict of interest on the record in the last couple of years, but we certainly have had them in the past. So you can't take action as a board member in a circumstance where your action can be seen to be in the benefit of somebody based on their personal relationship or another a financial transaction with you, anything along those lines. So anytime you have any concern about whether or not you might have a conflict of interest, whether I've asked you about it or not up front, anytime you feel like you may have been approached by somebody with respect to action the board is going to be taking, and you're, questioning whether that should come to you, whether it should, you should report those things to Sean, to me, to the board chair. If it's a vendor or that who's having improper conversations with you, then we're probably going to want to take action. Again, that's never happened. I tell you those things, but I know you hear all kinds of delightful examples at the NCTR conference and that. Unfortunately, we don't have any of those to talk about. Our staff and our board members are required annually to complete a disclosure conflict of interest. It's the next document starting on page 63. And again, I didn't print any clean copies, but I can get you clean copies if you.
It works out in the
It
packet
is,
that
yeah,
you can
right.
keep it complete, I think.
Yes,
Yeah, we
yes.
can.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it should be
Page
fine.
63.
So you need to complete the top of the form so what's on page 64, the first, you need to initial the confirmation section at the bottom of page 64. And then you need to complete all of the sections, answer all of the questions on pages 65 and 66. And I always say this half jokingly, that the right answer is always no. But the right answer is always the right answer. It's just that if the right answer is yes to any of those questions, then you need to provide additional information on another page, and we will review it and discuss whether or not it truly constitutes a conflict of interest. And sometimes that's something as simple, or the concern is something as simple as a family member or that who is also a member of the retirement system, not so much for all of you unless they were to come before us for a contested case matter or something along those lines, but I'm not thinking, I think at one time we had a staff member, but it could as easily be a board member who actually had a spouse who owned a company, and I was queried whether it would be appropriate for that company to apply to be a vendor for the retirement system. And I think that was before Sean's time here.
Must have been.
It was a fairly, they had no control, no authority over the selection of the vendor, et cetera, and it was not a conflict of interest. But that's typically the outcome. Having a conflict of interest doesn't mean you can't serve on the TRS board. It just means that we have to make a record of the conflict of interest and take appropriate steps to remediate either the actual, well, if it's an actual conflict of interest, it's a problem. If it's an appearance of a conflict of interest, then we remediate that appearance by putting it on the record, taking appropriate steps. Typically that means you don't participate in conversation about the issue and you don't vote on the issue. But it's not, we've very seldom had anything more than people knowing the board members. I'm sorry, than the applicants for disability. Speaking of which, we will have 2 of them today, and because we have so many people remotely, we will go through each one before and ask whether there are any conflicts of interest. So, and I think unless there are questions about ethical requirements, conflicts of interest, I'm probably through the policy.
Any questions by board members? Okay, seeing none. We will go ahead and move on to the applications and benefit adjustments.
Madam Vice Chair and members of the board, since the last board meeting in October, the active and retired staff have retired 37 benefit recipients for an average monthly benefit of a little over $1,400, average age of 61 and a half years, and average service of 18 years, almost 18 and a half years. Very different from the summer months.
Yeah.
Sarah,
Yes, ma'am.
does this number, the years of service 18.44, reflect all of the people that we contacted that had just small pieces of retirement?
So I'll go ahead and answer that question. So this is anyone that submitted an application and retired between September 1st and October 31st. So it's possible that some of them were just, slightly over 5 years. And that could be bringing that average down. It's kind of an odd time of year to retire. Most of our retirements happen in May and June and July. So that definitely could be part of what's bringing that number down.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, Member Brown, to further clarify your question, I'm just looking at the list of folks that retired. There's, looks like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 folks that are on the list out of that 37 recipients that have less than 10 years of service. So that's why they bring the average down for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other discussion, questions? Okay. Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and move on to the legal counsel's report.
Because now, Madam Vice Chair, members of the board, we have no ongoing legal cases at this point. I think we have issued, since the last board member, only one final staff determination. I think the time ran for them to come back and request board review of that determination. So I don't foresee any contested matters on the horizon either.
Lots of knocking on wood today, I
Yeah.
suppose, lots of good
It's gonna be the
things.
longest stretch you've ever seen. We've gone a while since.
Okay.
Well, some of those cases lasted, 15 years or whatever, right? I mean,
Yep.
it was-
Some of them.
One of them lasted 9.5,
Yeah.
that's the record so far for me, yeah.
Whew, okay. All right, well, with that, any further
One
discussion?
longer than that.
All right, we will go ahead and move into our closed meeting for disability applications. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and open back up for our open meeting on the applications for disability retirement benefits. In regards to Tara Derenberger, I'll need a motion on the status of her application, or her request.
I would make a motion to approve her disability request.
Is there a
I
second?
will second that.
Okay, the motion to.
This is Carrie Elliott.
The motion to approve Tara Derenberger's request for disability has been motioned and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any
Aye.
Any opposed? Same sign. All right, the chair votes aye as well. In regards to Shelley Gross's disability request, I'll need a motion to approve or disapprove.
I will move disapproval of the application for disability retirement benefit.
Second.
There's been a motion to disapprove Shelley Gross's disability request and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Same sign. Chair votes aye as well. And that concludes the disability applications. And now we move on to public comment.
Sorry.
Seeing none, I think we move for adjournment. I will entertain a motion to adjourn, I suppose.
So moved.
So moved. Merry Christmas.
I'll take that as the second then. All right, so it's been moved, it's been seconded, or motion and seconded. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, chair votes aye as
Those
well.
of you who drove, drive back safely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right.
Yes, definitely. Have a Merry Christmas,
Yes,
everyone.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.